Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever paused mid-thought and asked yourself, what if? What if I had done things differently? What if I had chosen another path, spoken another word, or walked away instead of staying? These what ifs are the seeds of regret, a garden where we often find ourselves lost. But tonight, let me walk you out of that garden and into a clearing where the sun shines on a life lived without regret. Regret is the weight of time misunderstood. Liberation comes from embracing what was, what is, and what will be. At its core, regret is not merely about the choices we've made, but about the relationship we have with time itself. It is the haunting notion that we could have shaped the past differently, rewritten the script of our lives to avoid pain, loss, or failure. Noticing the script of our lives is about the relationship, failure. We've written the script of our lives to avoid pain, loss, or failure. But this perception of regret is flawed because it assumes that life is linear, that time is a rigid sequence of cause and effect, and that perfection could somehow be achieved if we had acted differently. Regret weighs us down because it is rooted in a misunderstanding. It is a refusal to see the beauty in imperfection and a denial of the inevitable truth that every moment, whether joyous or painful, contributes to the mosaic of our lives. Regret whispers lies to us, telling us that the past defines us in unchangeable ways, but the past is not a sentence. It is a story, and stories evolve as we choose to interpret them differently. Consider the notion of time itself. We often think of it as something that flows in one direction, moving relentlessly forward, leaving behind the debris of mistakes, missed opportunities, and unspoken words. But time is far more complex than this simplistic view. The past is not static. It lives within us, shaped by the meanings we assign to it. Regret only thrives when we cling to the belief that the past should have been different, that our former selves should have known what we know now. But how could they? How could the person who stumbled blindly through a decision know the wisdom that would only come later? To hold your past self to the standards of your present self is to ignore the journey of growth that defines a human life. Liberation from regret begins with embracing what was. This means acknowledging that every choice, whether it led to triumph or hardship, was made with the best understanding and resources available at the time. No one makes decisions in the future. They are always made in the immediacy of the present moment, with all its complexities and uncertainties. To accept what was is not to glorify mistakes or pretend that pain did not occur. Instead, it is to honor the reality of those moments, to see them as necessary steps on the path that brought you to where you are today. The present, too, demands our attention. Regret often blinds us to the richness of now. When we dwell on what could have been, we miss the unfolding of what is. Life is happening in this very moment, not in the shadows of the past or the illusions of an imagined future. To embrace the present is to recognize its completeness, even if it is imperfect. It is to see that every breath, every heartbeat is an opportunity to begin again, to create anew and to live fully. And then there is the future, a canvas yet to be painted. Regret teaches us to fear the future, to anticipate failure, to doubt our ability to change, but this fear is misplaced. The future is not shaped by what we regret, but by how we choose to move forward. If the past has been a teacher, then the future is its classroom, a place where lessons are applied, not in pursuit of perfection, but in the pursuit of understanding, growth, and meaning. The weight of regret diminishes when we shift our focus from what cannot be undone to what can still be created. The truth is, liberation from regret requires an act of profound courage. The courage to embrace what was, what is, and what will be, without judgment or resistance. This is not an easy path. It asks us to confront our vulnerabilities, to sit with discomfort, and to let go of the illusion that life could ever be controlled or perfected. But in doing so, we discover freedom. The freedom to see the past not as a chain but as a foundation, the present not as a fleeting moment but as an eternal now, and the future not as a source of anxiety but as a realm of infinite possibility. Every life is a journey marked by mistakes, triumphs, losses and gains. Regret is but a signpost along the way, urging us to pause and reflect, but it is not a destination. To dwell in regret is to halt the journey, to stop moving forward, to miss the unfolding beauty of life itself. Liberation comes when we understand that regret is not a failure of the past, but a misunderstanding of time. It is a refusal to see that every moment, no matter how painful, has its purpose. What was cannot be changed, but it can be reframed. What is cannot be controlled, but it can be lived. What will be cannot be predicted, but it can be shaped. This is the essence of liberation, to hold the past with compassion, to meet the present with gratitude, and to greet the future with hope. In this way, the weight of regret is transformed into the wings of understanding, carrying us forward into a life of freedom and fulfillment. Every choice, even the mistaken ones, is a brushstroke on the canvas of your unique masterpiece. Life, when viewed from a distance, is much like a grand painting, an intricate, evolving work of art shaped by countless decisions, experiences, and emotions. Each brushstroke, whether deliberate or accidental, contributes to the depth, texture, and beauty of the whole, even the strokes you regret. The ones made in haste or ignorance are not flaws but essential elements of the masterpiece you are creating. When you step back and look at a painting, do you focus on a single brush stroke, questioning its placement, its color, or its purpose? Or do you allow your eyes to take in the full picture, appreciating how each stroke comes together to form something greater than the sum of its parts? The same is true of your life. A single choice, no matter how ill-considered it may seem in isolation, does not define you. It is merely one part of a much larger narrative, a narrative that is uniquely yours. Mistakes, failures, and missteps are often viewed as blemishes, as though they mar the purity of an otherwise perfect life. But perfection is an illusion. A masterpiece does not arise from the absence of flaws, but from the artist's ability to work with them, to integrate them into the whole in a way that adds depth and character. The most compelling works of art are those that evoke emotion, that tell a story rich with complexity and nuance. Similarly, your life gains meaning not from avoiding mistakes, but from embracing them, learning from them, and allowing them to shape your growth. Think of the great artists of history. Their masterpieces are not pristine or devoid of struggle. They are filled with evidence of experimentation, revision, and even failure. Da Vinci's Mona Lisa wasn't created in a single perfect stroke. Van Gogh's Starry Night is a swirl of chaos and beauty, each brushstroke carrying the weight of his struggles and emotion. In the same way, your life is a reflection of every moment you've lived, the joyful ones, the painful ones, and even the ones you wish you could erase. Regret often arises from the belief that a single choice could ruin the entire canvas of your life. But this is a misunderstanding of how a masterpiece is created. A dark brushstroke in the wrong place can initially feel like a mistake, but with time and perspective it can be transformed into shadow and depth, providing contrast that makes the lighter strokes shine even brighter. What feels like a misstep today may become, in hindsight, the very detail that gives your life its richness and meaning. Choices, even mistaken ones, are acts of creation. They are evidence of your agency, your willingness to engage with the world, and your courage to make decisions, even in the face of uncertainty. To make no choices at all would be to leave the canvas blank, to forfeit the opportunity to create something meaningful. Mistakes, then, are not failures, but marks of your humanity, signs that you are participating fully in the adventure of life. When you allow yourself to view life as a masterpiece in progress, you begin to see the value of every choice. That argument you had with a loved one, it may have deepened your understanding of each other, adding layers of vulnerability and strength to your relationship. That career path you pursued only to realize it wasn't right for you, it may have taught you more about yourself, helping you discover what truly matters. Even the choices that brought pain or heartbreak are not wasted. They are brush strokes that add texture and emotion to the canvas. It's easy to dwell on the what-ifs and the should-haves, but doing so keeps you trapped in a single corner of the canvas, staring at one stroke without appreciating the full picture. The beauty of a masterpiece lies not in its perfection, but in its ability to evoke a sense of awe and wonder. Your life is no different. The choices you make, including the mistaken ones, are not the end of the story. They are part of an ongoing process of creation, one that is as dynamic and evolving as you are. As you continue to paint the canvas of your life, remember that no stroke is final. Each one builds upon the others, creating layers of meaning and complexity. The so-called mistakes are often the most interesting parts, the places where the unexpected happens and the ordinary transforms into the extraordinary. What matters most is not whether every choice is right, but whether you continue to engage with the process, to paint with intention and courage. Life is not about achieving a perfect outcome, but about embracing the journey of creation. Each choice, each moment, is an opportunity to add to the masterpiece. And when the day comes for you to step back and view the full canvas of your life, you may find that it is not the perfection of the strokes that moves you, but their honesty, their humanity, and their raw beauty. Every brushstroke, even the mistaken ones, will have contributed to a masterpiece that is uniquely, authentically yours. Life's most profound lessons are hidden in its most uncomfortable moments. At first glance, discomfort feels like an unwelcome intruder, a force that disrupts our plans and challenges our sense of control. Yet, it is precisely in these moments of unease that life offers its greatest teachings, shaping us in ways that comfort never could. Growth and understanding are rarely born from convenience. They emerge from the friction of adversity, from the challenges that push us to confront the unknown within and around us. When we are comfortable, we tend to settle into patterns that feel safe and familiar. Life flows predictably, and while this stability is valuable, it often lacks the spark that ignites true transformation. Discomfort, on the other hand, shakes us out of our complacency. It forces us to confront truths we might otherwise avoid, compelling us to question, to adapt, and to grow. This is not to say that comfort is inherently bad or undesirable, but rather that it lacks the intensity to provoke deep introspection and meaningful change. Consider the times in your life when you've learned the most about yourself. Were these lessons born from moments of ease, or did they arise in the wake of challenges, failures, and heartbreaks? Often it is the latter. Uncomfortable moments strip away pretense and illusion, leaving us face to face with our vulnerabilities and strengths. In these moments, we discover what we are truly capable of, not by clinging to the familiar, but by embracing the uncertainty and chaos that discomfort brings. Take, for example, the experience of failure. Failure is inherently uncomfortable. It stings our pride and shakes our confidence. Yet within its sting lies a wealth of wisdom. Failure teaches resilience, showing us that setbacks are not the end, but an opportunity to begin anew with greater clarity and purpose. It forces us to reevaluate our choices, to identify what went wrong, and to approach the same challenges with a fresh perspective. Its success, while rewarding, often lacks the depth of insight that failure provides. It is through failure that we learn patience, humility, and the value of perseverance. Moments of emotional discomfort, grief, heartbreak, or disappointment have a way of revealing truths we might otherwise overlook. These experiences remind us of the impermanence of life, of the fragile beauty of relationships, and of the importance of cherishing what truly matters. Grief, though painful, teaches us to love more deeply, to hold others closer, and to appreciate the fleeting nature of time. Heartbreak, though devastating, often leads to a greater understanding of ourselves, our needs, and our capacity for love and forgiveness. Discomfort is also a catalyst for growth because it pushes us to step outside our comfort zones. When we face unfamiliar situations, we are forced to adapt, to think differently, and to confront fears that have held us back. The first step into the unknown is often the hardest, but it is also the most transformative. It is in these moments of uncertainty that we discover strengths we didn't know we had, talents we didn't realize we possessed, and perspectives we never considered. Discomfort, in this sense, is not an obstacle but an invitation, a call to expand beyond the limitations we've set for ourselves. There is also a profound connection between discomfort and authenticity. In moments of ease, it's tempting to maintain appearances, to conform to expectations, and to avoid difficult conversations. Discomfort, however, demands honesty. It strips away the superficial, leaving only what is real and true. When we face discomfort, we are forced to confront ourselves as we truly are, not as we wish to be seen. Instead of keeping the line short, the barber is encouraged to induce in his client, and in the Mayan sense, supernaturally. This confrontation can be unsettling, but it is also liberating. It allows us to shed the masks we wear and to embrace our genuine selves. Even in the physical realm, discomfort holds lessons. Think of the effort required to build strength or stamina. Muscles grow through resistance, through the discomfort of effort and strain. The same principle applies to the mind and spirit. Growth requires effort, and effort often brings discomfort. But the rewards, strength, resilience, and a deeper understanding of oneself are worth the struggle. Discomfort is not something to be feared or avoided. It is something to be embraced. It is a sign that we are alive, engaged, and growing. The moments that test us, that stretch us to our limits, are the very moments that define us. They are the crucibles in which character is forged, where wisdom is cultivated, and where true transformation occurs. Life's most profound lessons are not found in its easiest moments, but in its most challenging ones. These are the moments that demand our attention, our courage, and our willingness to evolve. They are the moments that remind us of our humanity, of our interconnectedness, and of the infinite potential within us to grow and thrive. So, when discomfort comes, welcome it not as an enemy, but as a teacher, knowing that within its challenges lie the seeds of your greatest growth. To regret is to live in resistance to the present. Acceptance is the only doorway to peace. Regret roots us in a state of tension, tethering our minds to events we cannot change and outcomes we cannot alter. It pulls us backward, away from the moment unfolding before us, and traps us in a cycle of longing for a past that no longer exists. The weight of regret can be immense, yet its presence serves as a reminder of the powerful choice we all have to release the past and embrace the now. Only through acceptance can we step into the present with clarity and find the peace that regret obscures. Regret often arises from our longing for things to have been different, a decision made differently, words left unsaid, or actions we wish we could undo. It is natural to feel this way. Humans are reflective beings, constantly analyzing and reanalyzing their experiences. However, this reflective nature can become a double-edged sword. When regret consumes us, it becomes a form of resistance, a refusal to accept that what has happened, happened. It's as if we are waging a silent battle against reality, hoping to rewrite a history that is already inked onto the pages of time. But in resisting what is unchangeable, we expend energy that could instead be directed toward healing, growing, and embracing the present. Acceptance, on the other hand, is a profound act of courage. It is not passive resignation or indifference, but an active acknowledgement of reality as it is. To accept is to stop fighting the tides of time and to recognize that while we cannot change the past, we can transform our relationship with it. Acceptance allows us to see regret for what it truly is, a reflection of our capacity to care deeply, to desire improvement, and to wish for connection. In accepting our regrets, we begin to understand that they do not define us. They are simply part of our human experience. Living in regret keeps us tethered to moments that no longer exist. It blinds us to the opportunities and beauty of the present moment, robbing us of the chance to create a different future. Imagine carrying a heavy bag filled with stones everywhere you go. Each stone represents a regret, and though you may wish to discard them, you cling to them out of habit or fear. The burden slows you down, drains your energy, and prevents you from fully experiencing life. Acceptance is the act of setting down the bag, recognizing that carrying it no longer serves you. It is a release, a letting go, that creates space for something new to emerge. Regret thrives on what-ifs and if-onlys, drawing us into a world of hypothetical scenarios that do not exist. Acceptance, however, grounds us in reality. It shifts our focus from what could have been to what is. This shift is transformative. When we accept the past, we no longer waste energy trying to change it. Instead, we can direct that energy toward understanding, learning, and growing from our experiences. The lessons we extract from regret become the foundation for wisdom, resilience, and self-compassion. The journey from regret to acceptance is not always easy. It requires patience and self-compassion. It may involve sitting with uncomfortable feelings, acknowledging mistakes, and confronting pain. But it also offers liberation. Acceptance does not mean condoning past mistakes or pretending they didn't happen. It means acknowledging them, forgiving yourself or others, and choosing not to let those mistakes dictate your present or future. It is an act of self-love, a recognition that you are more than the sum of your past actions. Regret can serve as a teacher if we allow it to. It can illuminate our values, show us areas for growth, and deepen our understanding of ourselves. But it is through acceptance that these lessons can truly take root. Without acceptance, regret becomes a stagnant pool, a place where we linger without progress. With acceptance, regret becomes a river, flowing forward and carrying us toward greater self-awarenessness and peace. Acceptance also opens the doorway to gratitude. When we let go of regret, we begin to notice the gifts that the present moment offers. We become attuned to the people, opportunities, and experiences that surround us, many of which we might have overlooked while dwelling on the past. Gratitude arises naturally when we release regret, for we realize that even the most painful moments have shaped us and contributed to our growth, and we quickly create an idea about it. To regret is to resist the flow of life, to cling to a narrative that no longer serves us. Acceptance, however, is an act of liberation. It is the choice to stop wrestling with what cannot be changed and to embrace the present with open arms. In doing so, we free ourselves from the shackles of the past and create space for peace, joy, and meaning in our lives. I say acceptance is not an end, it is a beginning, a doorway through which we step into the fullness of life, unburdened by the weight of what was, and fully alive to what is. The path to fulfillment is not in avoiding mistakes, but in transforming them into wisdom. Mistakes are an inevitable part of the human experience, woven into the fabric of growth and discovery. They are not failures in the truest sense, but opportunities cloaked in the guise of setbacks. To live in constant fear of mistakes is to deny ourselves the richness of learning, the depth of understanding, and the freedom to fully embrace life. Fulfillment does not come from perfection, but from the courage to navigate imperfection and turn it into something meaningful. Mistakes have an inherent power to teach us lessons that success often cannot. When we stumble, we are forced to pause, reflect, and recalibrate. These moments of reflection are where growth begins. A mistake highlights gaps in our knowledge or judgment, revealing areas where we can improve. It is not the mistake itself that defines us, but how we respond to it. Those who fear mistakes often remain stagnant, avoiding risks and opportunities for fear of failure. In contrast, those who embrace mistakes as part of their journey, learn to adapt, grow, and thrive. Consider the nature of wisdom itself. Wisdom is not something we are born with. It is cultivated over time through experience. Mistakes are the raw material from which wisdom is forged. They teach us patience, humility, and resilience. They show us the value of persistence and the importance of self-awareness. Each mistake we make becomes a chapter in the story of our lives, contributing to a greater understanding of ourselves and the world around us. To transform mistakes into wisdom is to alchemize pain into insight and regret into growth. Often we judge ourselves harshly for our mistakes, seeing them as signs of inadequacy or failure. Yet, this mindset ignores the profound truth that mistakes are a natural part of learning. A child learning to walk stumbles many times before finding their balance. Each fall is a necessary step toward mastery. In the same way, every mistake we make as adults is part of our journey toward becoming more capable, knowledgeable, and compassionate. To embrace this truth is to release the burden of self-judgment and view our mistakes through the lens of possibility. The fear of making mistakes can be paralyzing. It creates a mental cage, restricting our actions and limiting our potentials. This fear often stems from societal expectations of perfection or the pressure to meet certain standards. But perfection is an illusion, and the pursuit of it often leads to frustration and dissatisfaction. True fulfillment lies not in avoiding mistakes, but in embracing the messiness of life. It is about understanding that each misstep carries within it the seeds of growth, that each failure is a stepping stone to greater understanding. Mistakes also have the unique ability to deepen our empathy and connection with others. When we recognize our own fallibility, we become more compassionate toward the imperfections of others. We see that everyone is navigating their own challenges and learning from their own mistakes. This shared humanity fosters connection and understanding, reminding us that we are not alone in our struggles. So one thing that we tend to do when we have knowledge of this is to undermine those of the imperfections of others. In this way, mistakes can bring us closer to others, enriching our relationships and enhancing our sense of belonging. Transforming mistakes into wisdom requires a shift in perspective. It means viewing mistakes not as obstacles, but as opportunities for growth. It involves asking ourselves, What can I learn from this? How can this experience make me better? This mindset fosters resilience, allowing us to bounce back from setbacks with renewed determination and purpose. It also encourages a sense of curiosity, turning challenges into adventures and failures into experiments. The process of transforming mistakes into wisdom also requires vulnerability. It means acknowledging our imperfections and owning up to our errors. This vulnerability can be uncomfortable, but it is also liberating. When we stop hiding from our mistakes and start learning from them, we free ourselves from the weight of shame and guilt. We begin to see ourselves not as flawed individuals, but as evolving beings, constantly learning and growing. Mistakes, when embraced, can even become sources of inspiration. Many of history's greatest achievements have arisen from mistakes or failures. Consider the countless inventions, discoveries, and breakthroughs that were born from trial and error. The willingness to take risks, make mistakes, and learn from them is at the heart of innovation and creativity. It is this same spirit that can lead us to fulfillment in our own lives, inspiring us to push beyond our comfort zones and explore new possibilities. The path to fulfillment is not a straight road, but a winding journey filled with detours and challenges. Each mistake we make is a sign that we are moving forward, that we are engaged in the process of living and learning. To avoid mistakes is to avoid life itself, to miss out on the richness of experience and the depth of understanding that comes from facing challenges head on. Fulfillment is found not in perfection, but in transformation, in taking the raw, unpolished moments of life and turning them into something meaningful. It is about recognizing that mistakes are not the end of the story, but the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with wisdom, growth, and possibility. By embracing our mistakes and learning from them, we unlock the door to a life of purpose, resilience, and profound self-awareness. The only life worth living is one where every moment is owned without shame or apology. To live this way is to fully embrace the reality of who we are unapologetically and authentically. It means standing firm in the choices we make, the paths we take, and the person we are becoming, without the burden of seeking constant approval or fearing judgment. This is not a call to recklessness or indifference, but an invitation to radical self-acceptance, where every moment, good or bad, is met with accountability, grace, and courage. Owning every moment of our lives requires us to confront the parts of ourselves we often try to hide. Shame thrives in secrecy and grows when we deny or suppress our imperfections. But to live without shame is to shine a light on those hidden corners of our being and accept them as part of our story. It is understanding that our flaws do not diminish our worth, but rather make us human. Owning who we are means rejecting the narrative that we must be perfect to be worthy of love, respect, or happiness. It means choosing to stand in our truth, even when it is uncomfortable. Apology has its place in life, particularly when we have caused harm or acted without integrity. But the apology spoken of here is the one we offer unnecessarily, the one born of self-doubt, where we shrink ourselves to fit into spaces that were never meant to contain us. To live without this kind of apology is to refuse to dilute our essence to meet the expectations of others. It is to boldly occupy our space in the world, acknowledging that we are enough as we are. This is not arrogance, but confidence, rooted in self-awareness and self-respect. Living a life of ownership does not mean that we will never stumble or make mistakes. It is instead a recognition that mistakes are an inevitable part of the human journey. When we own our moments, we take responsibility for our actions without succumbing to the weight of guilt or shame. We learn to view mistakes as opportunities for growth rather than as evidence of failure. This perspective allows us to move forward with grace, using each experience as a stepping stone toward greater understanding and self-improvement. The fear of judgment often prevents us from living authentically. We worry about what others might think or say, and so we tailor our actions to fit into a mold that feels safer, more acceptable. But this compromises the integrity of our lives. A life worth living is not one spent trying to meet the expectations of others. It is one where we align our actions with our own values and truths. Therefore, when we live authentically, we give ourselves permission to be fully present in our lives, unburdened by the need for external validation. Owning every moment also means embracing the present. So often live in the shadow of the past, or in anticipation of the future, missing the richness of what is happening right now. To live without shame or apology is to fully inhabit the present, to be engaged with life as it unfolds. When we live this way, we stop wasting energy on regret or worry, and instead direct it toward creating a life that reflects our true desires and aspirations. There is a profound freedom in owning every moment. When we stop apologizing for our existence, we open ourselves to experiences, opportunities, and relationships that align with our true selves. This freedom allows us to pursue our passions without fear, to speak our truths without hesitation, and to build lives that are rich with meaning and purpose. It is a freedom that comes from knowing that we are not defined by others' opinions or by the labels society places on us. Living without shame or apology does not mean ignoring the impact we have on others. On the contrary, it requires a deep sense of accountability. It means owning not only our successes but also our missteps, our words and our actions. It means being willing to apologize when necessary, to make amends and to grow from the experience. True ownership is not about perfection, but about integrity. The willingness to stand by our values and take responsibility for our lives. Or, at its core, this way of living is about self-liberation. It is about breaking free from the chains of self-doubt, fear, and the need for external approval. It is about recognizing that our worth is inherent, that we are deserving of joy, love, and fulfillment, simply because we exist. When we live without shame or apology, we reclaim the power to define our own lives. We become the authors of our own stories, writing each chapter with intention and courage. Thank you for allowing me to share this journey of self-liberation and authenticity. May you own every moment of your life and create a legacy that reflects your true essence. Thank you. I find it a little difficult to say what the subject matter of this seminar is going to be, because it's too fundamental to give it a title. I'm going to talk about what there is. Now, the first thing, though, that we have to do is to get our perspectives with some background about the basic ideas which, as Westerners living today in the United States, influence our everyday common sense, our fundamental notions about what life is about. And there are historical origins for this which influence us more strongly than most people realize. Ideas of the world which are built into the very nature of the language we use and of our ideas of logic and of what makes sense altogether. And these basic ideas I call myth, not using the word myth to mean simply something untrue, but to use the word myth in a more powerful sense. A myth is an image in terms of which we try to make sense of the world. Now, for example, a myth in a way is a metaphor. If you want to explain electricity to someone who doesn't know anything about electricity, you say, well, you talk about an electric current. Now, the word current
is borrowed from rivers, is borrowed from hydraulics. And so you explain electricity in terms of water. Now, electricity is not water. It behaves actually in a different way, but there are some ways in which the behavior of water is like the behavior of electricity. And so you explain it in terms of water. Or if you're an astronomer and you want to explain to people what you mean by an expanding universe and curved space, you say, well, it's as if you had a black balloon, and there are white dots on the black balloon, and those dots represent galaxies. And as you blow the balloon up, uniformly, all of them grow and grow farther apart. But you're using an analogy. The actual universe is not a balloon with white dots on it. So in the same way, we use these sort of images to try and make sense of the world. And we at present are living under the influence of two very powerful images, which are, in the present state of scientific knowledge, inadequate. And one of our major problems today is to find an adequate, satisfying image of the world. Well, that's what I'm going to talk about. And I'm going to go further than that. Not only what image of the world to have, but how we can get our sensations and our feelings in accordance with the most sensible image of the world that we can manage to conceive. All right, now, the two images which we have been working under for 2,000 years and maybe more are what I would call two models of the universe. The first is called the ceramic model, and the second, the fully automatic model. The ceramic model of the universe is based on the book of Genesis, from which Judaism, Islam, and Christianity derive their basic picture of the world. And the image of the world in the book of Genesis is that the world is an artifact. It is made. As a potter takes clay and forms pots out of it, or as a carpenter takes wood and makes tables and chairs out of it. Don't forget, Jesus is the son of a carpenter, and also the Son of God. So the image of God and of the world is based on the idea of God as a technician, potter, carpenter, architect, who has in mind a plan and who fashions the universe in accordance with that plan. So basic to this image of the world is the notion, you see, that the world consists of stuff, basically. Primordial matter, substance, stuff, as pots are made of clay. Now, clay by itself has no intelligence. Clay does not of itself become a pot, although a good potter may think otherwise. Because if you were a really good potter, you don't impose your will on the clay. You ask any given lump of clay what it wants to become, and you help it to do that. And then you become a genius. But the ordinary idea I'm talking about is that simply clay is unintelligent. It's just stuff. And the potter imposes his will on it and makes it become whatever he wants. And so in the book of Genesis, the Lord God creates Adam out of the dust of the earth. In other words, he makes a clay figurine, and then he breathes into it, and it becomes alive, because the clay becomes informed. By itself, it is formless. It has no intelligence, and therefore it requires an external intelligence and an external energy to bring it to life and to put some sense into it. And so in this way, we inherit a conception of ourselves as being artifacts, as being made. And it is perfectly natural in our culture for a child to ask its mother, how was I made? Or who made me? And this is is a very, very powerful idea, but for example, it is not shared by the Chinese or by the Hindus. A Chinese child would not ask its mother, "How was I made?" A Chinese child might ask its mother, "How did I grow?" Which is an entirely different procedure from making. You see, when you make something, you put it together, you arrange parts, or you work from the outside to the in, as a sculptor works on a stone, or as the potter works on clay. But when you watch something growing, it works in exactly the opposite direction. It works from the inside to the outside. It expands, it burgeons, it blossoms, and it happens all over itself at once. In other words, the original simple form, say, of a living cell in the womb, progressively complicates itself. And that's the growing process, and it's quite different from the making process. But we have thought historically, you see, of the world as something made, the idea being that trees, for example, are constructions, just as tables and houses are constructions. And so there is, for that reason, a fundamental difference between the made and the maker. And this image, this ceramic model of the universe, originated in cultures where the form of government was monarchical, and where, therefore, the maker of the universe was conceived also at the same time in the image of the king of the universe. King of kings, Lord of lords, the only ruler of princes, who dost from thy throne behold all dwellers upon earth. I'm quoting the Book of Common Prayer. And so all those people who are oriented to the universe in that way feel related to basic reality as a subject to a king. And so they are on very, very humble terms in relation to whatever it is that works all this thing. I find it odd in the United States that people who are citizens of a republic have a monarchical theory of the universe, because we are carrying over from the very ancient Near Eastern cultures the notion that the Lord of the universe must be respected in a certain way. People kneel, people bow, people prostrate themselves. Because and you know what the reason for all that is? That nobody is more frightened of everybody else than the tyrant. He sits with his back to the wall, and his guards on either side of him. And he has you face downwards on the ground because you can't use weapons that way. When you come into his presence, you don't stand up and face him because you might attack. And he has reason to fear that you might, because he's ruling you all. And the man who rules you all is the biggest crook in the bunch, because he's the one who's succeeded in crime. The other people are pushed aside because the criminals, the people we lock up in jail, are simply the people who didn't make it. So naturally, the real boss sits with his back to the wall and his henchmen on either side of him. And so when you design a church, what does it look like? The Catholic Church, with the altar as it used to be. It's changing now because the Catholic religion is changing. But the Catholic Church has the altar with its back to the wall at the east end of the church. And there, the altar is the throne, and the priest is the chief vizier of the court, and he is making obeisance to the throne in front, but there is the throne of God, the altar. And all the people are facing it and kneeling down. And a great Catholic cathedral is called a basilica, from the Greek basileus, which means king. So a basilica is the house of a king. And the ritual of the Catholic Church is based on the court rituals of Byzantium. The Protestant church is a little different, but basically the same. The furniture of a Protestant church is based on a judicial courthouse. The pulpit, the judge in an American court wears a black robe. He wears exactly the same dress as a Protestant minister. And everybody sits in these boxes. Like there's a jury box, there's a box for the judge, there's a box for this, a box for that, and those are the pews in an ordinary kind of colonial type Protestant church. So both these kinds of churches, which have an autocratic view of the nature of the universe, decorate themselves, are architecturally constructed in accordance with political images of the universe. One is the king and the other is the judge, Your Honor. There's sense in this. When in court you have to refer to the judge as Your Honor, it stops the people engaged in litigation from losing their tempers and getting rude. There's a certain sense to that. But when you want to apply that image to the universe itself, to the very nature of life, it has limitations. For one thing, the idea of a difference between matter and spirit. This idea doesn't work anymore. Long, long ago, physicists stopped asking the question, what is matter? They began that way. They wanted to know, what is the fundamental substance of the world? And the more they asked that question, the more they realized they couldn't answer it. Because if you're going to say what matter is, you've got to describe it in terms of behavior. And that is to say, in terms of form, in terms of pattern. You tell what it does. You describe the smallest shapes of it that you can see. Do you see what happens? You look, say, at a piece of stone, and you want to say, well, what is this piece of stone made of? Well, you take your microscope, and you look at it, and instead of just this block of stuff, you see ever so many tinier shapes, little crystals. So you say, fine, so far so good. Now what are these crystals made of? And you take a more powerful instrument and you find that they are made of molecules. And then you take still more powerful instruments to find out what the molecules are made of. And you begin to describe atoms, electrons, protons, mesons, all sorts of sub-nuclear particles. But you never arrive at the basic stuff, because there isn't any. What happens is this: stuff is a word for the world as it looks when our eyes are out of focus, fuzzy. Stuff, the idea of stuff is that it's undifferentiated, it's some kind of a goo. And when your eyes are not in sharp focus, everything looks fuzzy. When you get your eyes into focus, you see a form, you see a pattern. But when you want to change the level of magnification and go in closer and closer and closer, you get fuzzy again before you get clear. So every time you get fuzzy, you go through thinking there's some kind of stuff there. But when you get clear, you see a shape. And so all that we can talk about is patterns. We never can talk about the stuff of which these patterns is supposed to be made, because you don't really have to suppose that there is any. It's enough to talk about the world in terms of pattern. It describes anything that can be described. And you don't really then have to suppose that there is some stuff which constitutes the essence of the pattern in the same way that clay constitutes the essence of pots. Clay, and so for this reason, you you don't really have to suppose that the world is some kind of helpless, passive, unintelligent junk which an outside agency has to inform and make it into intelligent shapes. So the picture of the world in the most sophisticated physics of today is not formed stuff, potted clay, but pattern. A self-moving, self-designing pattern, a dance. And we haven't yet, our common sense as individuals hasn't yet caught up with this. Well now, in the course of time, in the evolution of Western thought, the ceramic image of the world ran into trouble and changed into what I call the fully automatic model or image of the world. In other words, Western science was based on the idea that there are laws of nature, and it got that idea from Judaism and Christianity and Islam. That, in other words, the potter, the maker of the world in the beginning of things, laid down the laws, and the law of God, which is also the law of nature, is called the Logos. And in Christianity, the Logos is the second person of the Trinity, incarnate as Jesus Christ, who thereby is the perfect exemplar of the divine law. So we have tended to think of all natural phenomena as responding to laws, as if, in other words, the laws of the world were like the rails on which a streetcar or a tram or a train runs. And these things exist in a certain way, and all events respond to these laws. You know that limerick, there was a young man who said, "Damn, for it certainly seems that I am a creature that moves in determinate grooves. I'm not even a bus, I'm a tram." So, here's this idea that there's a kind of a plan, and everything responds and obeys that plan. Well, in the 18th century, Western intellectuals began to suspect this idea. What they suspected is whether there is a lawmaker, whether there is an architect of the universe. And they found out, or they reasoned, that you don't have to suppose that there is. Why? Because the hypothesis of God does not help us to make any predictions. Nor does it, in other words, let's put it this way. If the business of science is to make predictions about what's going to happen, science is essentially prophecy. What's going to happen? By studying the behavior of the past and describing it carefully, we can make predictions about what's going to happen in the future. That's really the whole of science. And to do this and to make successful predictions, you do not need God as a hypothesis, because it makes no difference to anything. If you say everything is controlled by God, everything is governed by God, that doesn't make any difference to your prediction of what's going to happen. And so what they did was simply drop that hypothesis. But they kept the hypothesis of law. Because if you can predict, if you can study the past and describe how things have behaved, and you've got some regularities in the behavior of the universe, you call that law. Although it may not be law in the ordinary sense of the word, it's simply regularity. And so what they did was they got rid of the lawmaker and kept the law. And so they conceived the universe in terms of a mechanism. Something, in other words, that is functioning according to regular, clock-like mechanical principles. Newton's whole image of the world is based on billiards. The atoms are billiard balls, and they bang each other around. And so your behavior, every individual therefore is defined as a very, very complex arrangement of billiard balls being banged around by everything else. And so behind the fully automatic model of the universe is the notion that reality itself is, to use the favorite term of 19th century scientists, blind energy. In, say, the metaphysics of Ernst Haeckel and T.H. Huxley, the world is basically nothing but energy. Blind, unintelligent force. And likewise, in parallel to this, in the philosophy of Freud, the basic psychological energy is libido, which is blind lust. And it is only a fluke. It is only as a result of pure chances that, resulting from the exuberance of this energy, there are people with values, with reason, with languages, with cultures, and with love. Just a fluke. Like, 1,000 monkeys typing 1,000 typewriters for 1,000,000 years will eventually type the Encyclopedia Britannica. And of course, the moment they stop typing the Encyclopedia Britannica, they will relapse into nonsense. And so in order that that shall not happen, because you and I are flukes in this cosmos, and we like our way of life, we like being human, if we want to keep it, say these people, we've got to fight nature, because it'll turn us back into nonsense the moment we let it. And so we've got to impose our will upon this world as if we were something completely alien to it from outside. And so we get a culture based on the idea of the war between man and nature. We talk about the conquest of space, the conquest of Everest, and the great symbols of our culture are the rocket and the bulldozer. Rocket. Phew. Compensation for the sexually inadequate male. So we're going to conquer space. We're in space already, way out. If anybody cared to be sensitive and let what's outside space come to you, you can if your eyes are clear enough. Aided by telescopes, aided by radio astronomy, aided by all the kind of sensitive instruments we can devise. We're as far out in space as we're ever going to get. But, sensitivity isn't the pitch. Especially in the WASP culture of the United States, we define manliness in terms of aggression. You see, because we're a little bit frightened as to whether we are really men. And so we put on this great show of being a tough guy. It's completely unnecessary. If you have what it takes, you don't need to put on that show. And you don't need to beat nature into submission. Why be hostile to nature? Because after all, you are a symptom of nature. You, as a human being, you grow out of this physical universe in just exactly the same way that an apple grows off an apple tree. So let's say the tree which grows apples is a tree which apples, using apple as a verb. And a world in which human beings arrive is a world that peoples. And so the existence of people is symptomatic of the kind of universe we live in. You, as a human being, you grow out of this physical universe in just exactly the same way that an apple grows off an apple tree. So let's say the tree which grows apples is a tree which apples, using apple as a verb. And a world in which human beings arrive is a world that peoples. And so the existence of people is symptomatic of the kind of universe we live in. just as spots on somebody's skin are symptomatic of chickenpox. Just as hair on a head is symptomatic of what's going on in the organism. But we have been brought up by reason of our two great myths, the ceramic and the fully automatic, not to feel that we belong in the world. So our popular speech reflects it. We say, I came into this world. You didn't, you came out of it. We say, face facts. We talk about encounters with reality, as if it was a head-on meeting of completely alien agencies, and the average person has the sensation that he is a somewhat that exists inside a bag of skin, the center of consciousness, which looks out at this thing and what the hell's it going to do to me? You see? I recognize you kind of look like me, and I've seen myself in a mirror, and you look like you might be people. So maybe you're intelligent, maybe you can love too, and maybe perhaps you're all right. Some of you are anyway. You've got the right color of skin, or you have the right religion, or whatever it is, you're okay. But there are all those people over in Asia, Africa, and they may not really be people. When you want to destroy someone, you always define them as unpeople. So, but we have this hostility to the external world because of the superstition, the myth, the absolutely unfounded theory that you yourself exist only inside your skin. Now I want to propose another idea altogether. You know, there are astronomers. There's two great theories going on in astronomy about the origination of the universe. One is called the explosion theory, and the other is called the steady state theory. The steady state people say there never was a time when the world began. It's always expanding, yes, but always as a result of free hydrogen in space. With the free hydrogen coagulates and makes new galaxies. But the other people say there was a primordial explosion, an enormous bang millions of years ago, billions of years ago, which flung all the galaxies into space. Well, let's take that just for the sake of argument and say that was the way it happened. It's like you took a bottle of ink and you threw it at a wall. Smash, and all that ink spreads. And in the middle, it's dense, isn't it? And as it gets out on the edge, the little droplets are finer and finer and make more complicated patterns. See? So in the same way, there was a big bang in the beginning of things, and it spread. And you and I, sitting here in this room, as complicated human beings, are way, way out on the fringe of that bang. We're the complicated little patterns on the end of it. Very interesting. But so we define ourselves as being only that. If you think that you are only inside your skin, you define yourself as one very complicated little curlicue, way out on the edge of that explosion, way out in space and way out in time. Billions of years ago, you were a big bang. And now you're a complicated human being. And then we cut ourselves off like this and don't feel that we're still the big bang. But you are. Depends how you define yourself. You are actually, if this is the way things started, if there was a Big Bang in the beginning, you're not something that is a result of the Big Bang. You're not something that is a sort of puppet on the end of the process. You are still the process. You are the Big Bang, the original force of the universe coming on as whoever you are. See, when I meet you, I see not just what you define yourself as, Mr. So-and-so, Miss So-and-so, Mrs. So-and-so. I see every one of you as the primordial energy of the universe coming on at me in this particular way. I know I'm that too. But we've learned to define ourselves as separate from it. And so what I would call a kind of a basic problem we've got to go through first is to understand that there are no such things as things. That is to say, separate things. or separate events. That is only a way of talking. If you can understand this, you're going to have no further problems. I once asked a group of high school children, what do you mean by a thing? And first of all, they gave me all sorts of synonyms. They said it's an object, which is simply another word for a thing. It doesn't tell you anything about what you mean by a thing. Finally, a very smart girl from Italy who was in the group said a thing is a noun. She was quite right. A noun isn't a part of nature, it's a part of speech. There are no nouns in the physical world. There are no separate things in the physical world either. See, the physical world is wiggly. It's something like this. Maybe that's a cloud. But clouds, mountains, trees, people are all wiggly. And only when human beings get working at things, they build buildings in straight lines and try and make out that the world isn't really wiggly. But here are we sitting in this room all built on straight lines, but each one of us is as wiggly as all get out. Now then, when you want to get control of something that wiggles, it's pretty difficult, isn't it? You try and pick up a fish in your hands and the fish is wiggly and it slips out. What do you do to get hold of the fish? You use a net. And so the net is the basic thing we have for getting hold of the wiggly world. So if you want to get hold of this wiggle, you've got to put a net over it. You see? Now what's going to happen? A net is something regular. And I can number the holes in a net. So many holes up, so many holes across. And if I can number these holes, I can count exactly where each wiggle is in terms of a hole in that net. And that's the beginning of calculus, the art of measuring the world. But in order to do that, I've got to break up the wiggle into bits. And I've got to call this a specific bit, and this the next bit of the wiggle, and this the next bit, and this the next bit of the wiggle. And so these bits are things or events. Bits of wiggles, which I mark out in order to talk about the wiggle, in order to measure it, and therefore in order to control it. But in nature, in fact, in the physical world, the wiggle isn't bitted. Like you don't get a cut-up fryer out of an egg. But you have to cut the chicken up in order to eat it. You bite it. But it doesn't come bitten. So the world doesn't come thinged. It doesn't come evented. You and I are all as much continuous with the physical universe as a wave is continuous with the ocean. The ocean waves, and the universe peoples. And as the wave, I wave at you and say, you! The world is waving at you, at me with you, and saying, hi, I'm here. But we are consciousness, the way we feel and sense our existence, being based on a myth that we are made, that we are parts, that we are things. Our consciousness has been influenced so that each one of us does not feel that. We have been hypnotized, literally hypnotized, by social convention into feeling and sensing that we exist only inside our skins. That we are not the original bang, but just something out on the end of it. And therefore we are scared stiff. Because my wave is going to disappear. And I'm going to die. And that would be awful. We've got a mythology going now, which as Father Maskell put it, we're nothing but something that happens between the maternity ward and the crematorium. And that's it. And therefore everybody feels unhappy and miserable. You know, this is what people really believe today. You may go to church, you may say you believe in this, that, and the other, but you don't. Even Jehovah's Witnesses, who are the most fundamentalists, they're polite when they come round and knock at the door. But if you really believed in Christianity, you would be screaming in the streets. be taking full-page ads in the paper every day. You would have the most terrifying television programs. The churches would be going out of their minds if they really believe what they teach, but they don't. They think they ought to believe what they teach. They believe they should believe, but they don't believe it, because what we really believe is the fully automatic model. And that is our basic, plausible common sense. You are a fluke. You are a separate event. And you run from the maternity ward to the crematorium, and that's it, baby. That's it. Now, why does anybody think that way? There's no reason to, because it isn't even scientific. It's just a myth. And it's invented by people who wanted to feel a certain way. They want to play a certain game. See, the game of God got embarrassing. The idea of God as the potter, the architect of the universe, is good. It makes you feel that life is, after all, important. There is someone who cares. It has meaning, it has sense, and you are valuable in the eyes of the Father. But after a while, it gets embarrassing. When you realize that everything you do is being watched by God. He knows your tiniest, inmost feelings and thoughts, and you say after a while, quit bugging me. I don't want you around. So you become an atheist, just to get rid of it. Then you feel terrible after that, because you got rid of God, but that means you got rid of yourself. You're just nothing but a machine. And your idea that you're a machine is just a machine too. So if you're a smart kid, you commit suicide. Camus said there is only really one serious philosophical question, which is whether or not to commit suicide. I think there are 4 or 5 serious philosophical questions. The first one is, who started it? The second is, are we going to make it? The third is, where are we going to put it? The fourth is, who's going to clean up? And the fifth, is it serious? But still, should you or not commit suicide? This is a good question. Why go on? And you only go on if the game is worth the candle. Now, the universe has been going on for an incredible long time. And so really, a satisfactory theory of the universe has to be one that's worth betting on. It seems to me, absolutely elementary common sense. If you make a theory of the universe which isn't worth betting on, why bother? Just commit suicide. But if you want to go on playing the game, you've got to have an optimal theory for playing the game. Otherwise, there's no point in it. But the people who coined the fully automatic theory of the universe were playing a very funny game. What they wanted to say was this: all you people who believe in religion are old ladies and wishful thinkers. You've got a big daddy up there and you want to comfort and thing, but life is rough. Life is tough. And success goes to the most hard-headed people. That was a very convenient theory when the European American world was colonizing the natives everywhere else. They said, we are the end product of evolution, and we're tough. See, I'm a big, strong guy because I face facts, and life is just a bunch of junk, and I'm going to impose my will on it and turn it into something else, you see. And I'm real hard. See, that's a way of flattering yourself. And so it has become academically plausible, fashionable, that this is the way the world works. In academic circles, no other theory of the world than the fully automatic model is respectable. Because if you're an academic person, you've got to be an intellectually tough person. You've got to be prickly. There are basically 2 kinds of philosophy. One's called prickles, the other's called goon. And prickly people example, in physics, prickly people believe that the ultimate constituents of matter are particles. Goo people believe it's waves. And in philosophy, prickly people are logical positivists and goo people are idealists. And they're always arguing with each other. And what they don't realize is that neither one can take his position without the other person. Because you wouldn't know you advocated prickles unless there was somebody else advocating goo. You wouldn't know what a prickle was unless you knew what goo was. Because life is not either prickles or goo, it's gooey prickles and prickly goo. They go together like back and front, male and female. And that's the answer to philosophy. See, I'm a philosopher, and I'm not going to argue very much, because if you don't argue with me, I don't know what I think. So if we argue, I say thank you, because going to the courtesy of your taking a different point of view, I understand what I mean, so I can't get rid of you. But however, you see, this whole idea that the universe is just nothing at all but unintelligent force playing around, not even enjoying it, is a put-down theory of the world. People who had an advantage to make, a game to play, by putting it down and making out that because they put the world down, they were a superior kind of people. So that just won't do. We've had it. Because if you seriously go along with this idea of the world, you're what is technically called alienated. You feel hostile to the world. You feel that the world is a trap. It is a mechanism, it's electronic and neurological mechanisms into which you somehow got caught. And you, poor thing, have to put up with being in a body that's falling apart and that gets cancer, that gets the great Siberian itch, and it's just terrible. And these mechanics doctors are trying to help you out, but they really can't succeed in the end. And you're just going to fall apart, and it's a grim business, and it's too bad. So if you think that that's the way things are, you may as well commit suicide right now. Unless you say, well, I daren't. Because there really, after all, there might be eternal damnation in the back of the thing if I did that. Or then I identify with my children or something, and I think of them going on without me and nobody to support them. But of course, if I do go on in this frame of mind and continue to support them, I shall merely teach them to be like I am. And they'll go on dragging it out to support their children, and they won't enjoy it. And they'll be afraid to commit suicide, and so will their children. They all learn the same lesson. So you see, all I'm trying to say is that the basic common sense about the nature of the world that is influencing most people in the United States today, the fully automatic model, is simply a myth. If you want to say that the idea of God the Father with his white beard on the golden throne is a myth, in the bad sense of the word myth, so is this other one. It's just as phony and has just as little to support it as being the true state of affairs. Why? And let's get this clear. If there is any such thing at all as intelligence and love and beauty, well, you found it in other people. In other words, it exists in us as human beings. And as I said, if it is there in us, it is symptomatic of the scheme of things. We are as symptomatic of the scheme of things as the apples are symptomatic of the apple tree or the rose of the rose bush. The earth is not a big rock infested with living organisms, any more than your skeleton is bones infested with cells. The earth is geological, yes, but this geological entity grows people. And our existence on the earth is a symptom of the solar system and its balances, as much as the solar system in turn is a symptom of our galaxy. And our galaxy in its turn is a symptom of the whole company of galaxies. Goodness only knows what that's in. But you see, when as a scientist you describe the behavior of a living organism, you try to say what a person does. It's the only way in which you can describe what a person is. Describe what they do. Then you find out that in making this description, you cannot confine yourself to what happens inside the skin. In other words, you can't talk about a person walking unless you start describing the floor. Because when I walk, I don't just dangle my legs in empty space. I move in relationship to a room. And so in order to describe what I'm doing when I'm walking, I have to describe the room. I have to describe the territory. So in describing my talking at the moment, I can't describe this just as a thing in itself, because I'm talking to you. And so what I'm doing at the moment is not completely described unless your being here is described also. So if that is necessary, if in other words, in order to describe my behavior, I have to describe your behavior and the behavior of the environment, it means that we've really got one system of behavior. That what I am involves what you are. I don't know who I am unless I know who you are. And you don't know who you are unless you know who I am. There was a wise rabbi once said, if I am I because you are you, and you are you because I am I, then I am not I and you are not you. In other words, we are not separate. We define each other. We're all backs and fronts to each other. You know, you can't, for example, have two sticks. You lean two sticks against each other and they stand up because they support each other. Take one away and the other falls. Or you know, Ballantine beer trademark, also a symbol of the Holy Trinity, where there are three interlocked rings. If you pull one out, the other two separate. They interdepend. And so in exactly that way, we and our environment, and all of us and each other, are interdependent systems. We know who we are in terms of other people. We all lock together. And this is, again and again, the serious scientific description of how things happen. And to such an extent that any good scientist knows, therefore, that what you call the external world is as much you as your own body. Your skin doesn't separate you from the world, it's a bridge through which the external world flows into you, and you flow into it. Just, for example, as a whirlpool in water, you could say, because you have a skin, you have a definite shape, you have a definite form. All right? Here is a flow of water, and it does a whirlpool. Then it goes on. The whirlpool is a definite form, but no water stays put in it. The whirlpool is something the stream is doing. And exactly the same way, the whole universe is doing each one of us. And I see you today, and I recognize you tomorrow, just as I would recognize a whirlpool in a stream. I'd say, oh yes, I've seen that whirlpool before. It's just near so-and-so's house on the edge of the river. It's always there. So in the same way, when I meet you tomorrow, I recognize you. You're the same whirlpool you were yesterday. But you're moving. The whole world is moving through you. All the cosmic rays, all the food you're eating, the stream of steaks and milk and eggs and everything is just flowing right through you. When you're wiggling the same way, the world is wiggling, the stream is wiggling you. But the problem is, you see, we haven't been taught to feel that way. The myths underlying our culture and underlying our common sense have not taught us to feel identical with the universe, but only parts of it, only in it, only confronting it, aliens. And we are, I think, quite urgently in need of coming to feel that we are the eternal universe, each one of us. Otherwise, we're going to go out of our heads. We're going to commit suicide, collectively, with courtesy of H-bombs. And, all right, supposing we do, well, that will be that, and it'll be life making experiments on other galaxies. Maybe they'll find a better game. Change, and everything is change, nothing can be held on to. To the degree that you go with a stream, you see, you are still. You're flowing with it. But to the degree you resist the stream, then you notice that the current is rushing past you and fighting with you. So swim with it. Go with it. And you're there. You're at rest. And this is, of course, particularly true when it comes to those moments when life really seems to be going to take us away. And the stream of change is going to swallow us completely. The moment of death. And we think, oh, this is it. This is the end. And so at death we withdraw. Say, no, not that. Not yet, please. But actually, the whole problem is that there really is no other problem for human beings than to go over that waterfall when it comes. Just as you go over any other waterfall. Just as you go on from day to day. Just as you go to sleep at night. Be absolutely willing to die. Now, I'm not preaching. I'm not saying you ought to be willing to die and that you should muscle up your courage and somehow put on a good front when the terrible thing comes. That's not the idea at all. The point is that you can only die well if you understand this system of waves. If you understand that your disappearance as the form in which you think you are you, your disappearance as this particular organism, is simply seasonal, that you are just as much the dark space beyond death as you are the light interval called life. These are just two sides of you, because you is the total wave. See, you can't have half a wave. Nobody ever saw waves which just had crests, no troughs. So you can't have half a human being who is born but doesn't die. Half a thing. That would be only half a thing. But the propagation of vibrations, and life is vibration, it simply goes on and on, but its cycles are long cycles and short cycles. Space, you see, is not just nothing. If I could magnify my hand to an enormous degree so that you could see all the molecules in it, I don't know how far apart they would be, but it seems to me they would be something like tennis balls in a very, very large space. And you'd look when I move my hand like this, you say, for God's sake, look at all those tennis balls. They're all going together. Crazy. And there are no strings tying them together. Isn't that queer? No, but there's space going with them. And space is a function of, or it's an inseparable aspect of, whatever solids are in the space. That is the clue, probably, to what we mean by gravity. We don't know yet. So in the same way, when those marvelous sandpipers come around here, the little ones, while they're in the air flying, they have one mind. They move all together. When they alight on the mud, they become individuals and they go picking around for worms or something. But one click of the fingers and all those things are going zipped into the air. They don't seem to have a leader, because they don't follow when they turn. They all turn together and go off in another direction. Amazing. But they're like the molecules in my hand. So then you see, here's the principle. When you don't resist change, I mean over-resist. I don't mean being flabby. When you don't resist change, you see that the changing world, which disappears like smoke, is no different from the nirvana world. Nirvana, as I said, means breathe out. Let go of the breath. So in the same way, don't resist change. It's all the same principle. So the Bodhisattva saves all beings, not by preaching sermons to them, but by showing them that they are delivered, they are liberated by the very fact of not being able to stop changing. You can't hang on to yourself. You resisting death. I love the story of a conversation at an English country house at a dinner party, where the hostess started up the question of Church of England. He was the church warden, chief of the vestry in the local country parish. And the lady said, Sir Roderick, you haven't said a word. What do you think is going to happen to you when you... And they make death just awful by pretending it doesn't happen. See what happens. You go to a hospital and you're at the end. You've got terminal cancer. And all your friends come around and they wear false smiles and they say, cheer up, you'll be all right. In a few days from now you'll be back home and we'll go out for a picnic again. The doctors have their bedside man. You see, a doctor is absolutely helpless with a terminal case because a doctor is by social definition a healer, and he's not allowed to help you die. He's out of role. Even though, I mean, he may sneak behind the rules and do it, but he's definitely, he's got to heal you. So he's going to keep you indefinitely on the end of tubes and all kinds of things. While there's a certain grave demeanor to all this, and all the nurses are so pleasant and so totally distant because they know this is death. And they mayn't be frank with you, that's why they feel distant. It's not that they're not concerned, it's not that they're heartless people, but that they just don't know how to be frank, like lots of people when they meet a drunk, they don't know what to do with a drunk. Because he's not behaving right. And so when you're dying, you're not behaving right, you're supposed to live. See, so we don't know what to do with a dying person. We don't get around that person and say, listen man, I've got the news for you, you're going to die. And this is going to be great. Look, no more responsibilities. Don't have to pay those bills anymore. Don't have to worry about anything. You're going to just die. And let's go out with a bang. Let's have a party, see? We'll put some of that morphine in you so that you won't hurt too much. But we're going to prop you up in bed and we're going to bring all our friends around and we're going to have champagne and you're going to die at the end of it, see? And it's going to be just marvelous. Just like being born. See, when we had birth problems, see, all women used to think that birth had to be painful. It was good for them. It was one of the things you had to suffer because you'd been screwing around with people, and therefore you had to have a child, and it's got to hurt. And then the doctors got together and they scratched their heads, and a man called Grantley Dick Reed said, no, birth doesn't hurt, it's natural. All we've got to do is to talk these women into the idea that it doesn't hurt, that all these so-called pains are just tensions, and that birth is great. It's not a disease. It's not really something you ought to go to hospital for, because you associate hospitals with diseases and sickness. Birth isn't sickness. All right, now let's do some new thinking. What about death? Is death sickness? Or is it a healthy, natural event like being born? Of course it is. So, I mean, a little change in social attitude about this will fortify everybody else. I mean, if I'm alone and all my relatives are going, kind of pretending to me, it's going to be hard for me. I've got to challenge the whole bunch of them and get my dander up and say, listen, damn you, I don't want all this thing around here. You've got to take a different attitude about my death. Well, that's hard. But if everybody helps me, and we do, we're all one body, if they all come around and say, congratulations, you're going to die. Liberation now, you see, because just before you die, I mean, look, I know very well a skillful priest handling a person dying can do this for them. But he has to talk very, very, very straight. And he has to say, listen, these doctors, don't you pay any attention to them. They're trying to amuse you and deceive you. You're going to die. This isn't terrible. But it's just going to be the end of you as a system of memories. And so you've got a great chance right now, before it happens, to let go of everything. Because you know it's going to go, and it is going to help you. It's going to help you let go of everything. So, if you have any possessions left, give them away. Give everything away. And if you have anything to say that is you felt that you ought to say before you die, and that you're kind of hanging on to and it's bothering you, say it. I mean, I don't mean necessarily a last confession, but say it said that Adlai Stevenson, shortly before he died, said that he had been making a monkey of himself because he didn't agree with the government's policy about something or other. You know, he had to get that off his chest because he had a little thought in the back of his mind that things were catching up with him. You see? So the moment comes when this thing called death has to be taken completely, not as some ghastly accident, something that all your friends are going to stay away because you're awful. I mean, sometimes people, when they die, are in a very unpleasant physical condition. They don't smell good, they don't look good, and so on. But an enormous amount can be done with scientific methods to make things reasonably tidy from a purely sensory point of view. But the main thing is the attitude, that death is as positive as birth and should be a matter for rejoicing, because death is the symbol of the liberation. Change, and everything is changed, nothing can be held on to. To the degree that you go with a stream, you see, you are still. You're flowing with it. But to the degree you resist the stream, then you notice that the current is rushing past you and fighting with you. So swim with it. Go with it. And you're there. You're at rest. And this is, of course, particularly true when it comes to those moments when life really seems to be going to take us away. And the stream of change is going to swallow us completely. The moment of death. And we think, oh, this is it. This is the end. And so at death we withdraw. Say, no, not that. Not yet, please. But actually, the whole problem is that there really is no other problem for human beings than to go over that waterfall when it comes, just as you go over any other waterfall, just as you go on from day to day, just as you go to sleep at night. Be absolutely willing to die. Now, I'm not preaching. I'm not saying you ought to be willing to die and that you should muscle up your courage and somehow put on a good front when the terrible thing comes. That's not the idea at all. The point is that you can only die well if you understand this system of waves. If you understand that your disappearance as the form in which you think you are you, your disappearance as this particular organism, is simply seasonal, that you are just as much the dark space beyond death as you are the light interval called life. These are just two sides of you, because you is the total wave. See, you can't have half a wave. Nobody ever saw waves which just had crests, no troughs. So you can't have half a human being who is born but doesn't die. Half a thing. That would be only half a thing. But the propagation of vibrations, and life is vibration, it simply goes on and on, but its cycles are long cycles and short cycles. Space, you see, is not just nothing. If I could magnify my hand to an enormous degree so that you could see all the molecules in it, I don't know how far apart they would be, but it seems to me they would be something like tennis balls in a very, very large space. And you'd look, when I move my hand like this, and say, for God's sake, look at all those tennis balls. They're all going together. Crazy. And there are no strings tying them together. Isn't that queer? No, but there's space going with them. And space is a function of, or it's an inseparable aspect of, whatever solids are in the space. That is the clue, probably, to what we mean by gravity. We don't know yet. So in the same way, when those marvelous sandpipers come around here, the little ones, while they're in the air flying, they have one mind. They move all together. When they alight on the mud, they become individuals and they go picking around for worms or something. But one click of the fingers and all those things are going zipped into the air. They don't seem to have a leader, because they don't follow when they turn. They all turn together and go off in another direction. Amazing. But they're like the molecules in my hand. So then you see, here's the principle. When you don't resist change, I mean over-resist. I don't mean being flabby. When you don't resist change, you see that the changing world, which disappears like smoke, is no different from the nirvana world. Nirvana, as I said, means breathe out. Let go of the breath. So in the same way, don't resist change. It's all the same principle. So the Bodhisattva saves all beings, not by preaching sermons to them, but by showing them that they are delivered, they are liberated by the very fact of not being able to stop changing. You can't hang on to yourself. You
resisting death. I love the story of a conversation at an English country house at a dinner party, where the hostess started up the question of Church of England. He was the church warden, chief of the vestry in the local country parish. And the lady said, "Sir Roderick, you haven't said a word. What do you think is going to happen to you when you..." And they make death just awful by pretending it doesn't happen. See what happens. You go to a hospital and you're at the end. You've got terminal cancer. And all your friends come around and they wear false smiles and they say, "Cheer up, you'll be all right. In a few days from now you'll be back home and we'll go out for a picnic again." The doctors have their bedside man. You see, a doctor is absolutely helpless with a terminal case because a doctor is by social definition a healer, and he's not allowed to help you die. He's out of role, even though, I mean, he may sneak behind the rules and do it, but he's got to heal you. So he's going to keep you indefinitely on the end of tubes and all kinds of things, while there's a certain grave demeanor to all this, and all the nurses are so pleasant and so totally distant because they know this is death. And they mayn't be frank with you. That's why they feel distant. It's not that they're not concerned. It's not that they're heartless people, but that they just don't know how to be frank, like lots of people when they meet a drunk. They don't know what to do with a drunk because he's not behaving right. And so when you're dying, you're not behaving right. You're supposed to live. See, so we don't know what to do with a dying person. We don't get around that person and say, listen, man, I've got the news for you. You're going to die. And this is going to be great. Look, no more responsibilities. Don't have to pay those bills anymore. Don't have to worry about anything. You're going to just die. And let's go out with a bang. Let's have a party, see? We'll put some of that morphine in you so that you won't hurt too much. But we're going to prop you up in bed, and we're going to bring all our friends around, and we're going to have champagne, and you're going to die at the end of it, see? And it's going to be just marvelous. Just like being born, see? When we had birth problems, see, all women used to think that birth had to be painful. It was good for them. It was one of the things you had to suffer because you'd been screwing around with people, and therefore you had to have a child, and it's got to hurt. And then the doctors got together and they scratched their heads, and a man called Grantley Dick Reed said, "No, birth doesn't hurt, it's natural." All we've got to do is to talk these women into the idea that it doesn't hurt, that all these so-called pains are just tensions, and that birth is great. It's not a disease. It's not really something you ought to go to hospital for, because you associate hospitals with diseases and sickness. Birth isn't sickness. All right, now let's do some new thinking. What about death? Is death sickness? Or is it a healthy, natural event like being born? Of course it is. So, I mean, a little change in social attitude about this will fortify everybody else. I mean, if I'm alone and all my relatives are going, kind of pretending to me, it's going to be hard for me. I've got to challenge the whole bunch of them and get my dander up and say, "Listen, damn you, I don't want all this thing around here. You've got to take a different attitude about my death." Well, that's hard. But if everybody helps me, and we do, we're all one body, if they all come around and say, "Congratulations, you're going to die." Liberation now, you see, because just before you die, I mean, look, I know very well a skillful priest handling a person dying can do this for them. But he has to talk very, very, very straight. And he has to say, "Listen, these doctors, don't you pay any attention to them. They're trying to amuse you and deceive you. You're going to die. This isn't terrible, but it's just going to be the end of you as a system of memories. And so you've got a great chance right now, before it happens, to let go of everything. Because you know it's going to go, and it is going to help you. It's going to help you let go of everything. So if you have any possessions left, give them away. Give everything away. And if you have anything to say that is you felt that you ought to say before you die, and that you're kind of hanging on to and it's bothering you, say it. I mean, I don't mean necessarily a last confession, but say it said that Adlai Stevenson, shortly before he died, said that he had been making a monkey of himself because he didn't agree with the government's policy about something or other. You know, he had to get that off his chest because he had a little thought in the back of his mind that things were catching up with him. You see? So the moment comes when this thing called death has to be taken completely, not as some ghastly accident, something that all your friends are going to stay away because you're awful. I mean, sometimes people, when they die, are in a very unpleasant physical condition. They don't smell good, they don't look good, and so on. But an enormous amount can be done with scientific methods to make things reasonably tidy from a purely sensory point of view. But the main thing is the attitude. That death is as positive as birth and should be a matter for rejoicing, because death is the symbol of the liberation. There is a wonderful saying that Ananda Kumaraswamy used to quote. I pray that death will not come and find me still unannihilate. In other words, that man dies happy if there is no one to die. In other words, if the ego has disappeared before death caught up with it. But you see, the knowledge of death helps the ego to disappear, because it tells you you can't hang on. So what we need, if we're going to have a good religion around, that's one of the places where it can start. I was talking a great deal yesterday afternoon about the Buddhist attitude to change, to death, to the transience of the world, and we're showing that preachers of all kinds stir people up in the beginning by alarming them about change. That's like somebody, actually raising an alarm, just in the same way as if I want to pay you a visit, I ring the doorbell. And then we can come in and I don't need to raise an alarm anymore. So in the same way, it sounds terrible, you see, that everything is going to die and pass away, and here you are, thinking that happiness, sanity, and security consist in clinging on to things which can't be clung to, and in any case there isn't anybody to cling to them. And the whole thing is a weaving of smoke. So that's the initial standpoint. But as soon as you really discover this and you stop clinging to change, then everything is quite different. It becomes amazing. And not only do all your senses become more wide awake, not only do you feel almost that you're walking on air, but you see finally that there is no duality, no difference between the ordinary world and the nirvana world. They're the same world, but what makes the difference is the point of view. And of course, if you keep identifying yourself with some sort of stable entity that sits and watches the world go by, you don't acknowledge your union, your inseparability from everything else that there is. You go by with all the rest of the things, but if you insist on trying to take a permanent stand, on trying to be a permanent witness of the flux, then it grates against you and you feel very uncomfortable. But it is a fundamental feeling in most of us that we are such witnesses. We feel that behind the stream of our thoughts, of our feelings and our experiences, there is something which is the thinker, the feeler, and the experiencer. Not recognizing that that is itself a thought, feeling, or experience, and it belongs within and not outside the changing panorama of experience. It's what you call a cue signal. In other words, when you telephone and your telephone conversation is being tape recorded, it's the law that there shall be a beep every so many seconds. And that beep cues you in to the fact that this conversation is recorded. So in a very similar way, in our everyday experience, there's a beep which tells us this is a continuous experience which is mine. Beep. In the same way, for example, it is a cue signal when a composer arranges some music and he keeps in it a recurrent theme, but he makes many variations on it. Or more subtle still, he keeps within it a consistent style. So you know that it's Mozart all the way along, because it sounds like Mozart. But there isn't, as it were, a constant noise going all the way through to tell you it's continuous, although in Hindu music they do have something called the drone. There is behind all the drums and every kind of singing something that goes and it always sounds the note which is the tonic of the scale being used. But in Hindu music, that drone represents the eternal self, the Brahman, behind all the changing forms of nature. But that's only a symbol. And to find out what is eternal, you can't make an image of it, you can't hold on to it. And so it's psychologically more conducive to liberation to remember that the thinker or the feeler or the experiencer and the experiences are all together, they're all one. But if out of anxiety you try to stabilize, keep permanent the separate observer, you are in for conflict. Of course, the separate observer, the thinker of the thoughts, is an abstraction which we create out of memory. We think of the self, the ego, rather, as a repository of memories, a kind of safety deposit box or record or filing cabinet place where all our experiences are stored. Now, that's not a very good idea. It's more that memory is a dynamic system, not a storage system. It's a repetition of rhythms. And these rhythms are all part and parcel of the ongoing flow of present experience. In other words, first of all, how do you distinguish between something known now and a memory? Actually, you don't know anything at all until you remember it. Because if something happens that is purely instantaneous, if a light flashes, or to be more accurate, if there is a flash lasting only 1/1,000,000th of a second, you probably wouldn't really experience it, because it wouldn't give you enough time to remember it. We say in customary speech, well, it has to make an impression. So in a way, all present knowledge is memory, because you look at something and for a while the rods and cones in your retina respond to that, and they do their stuff, jiggle, jiggle, jiggle. It's all vibration. And so as you look at things, they set up a series of echoes in your brain. And these echoes keep reverberating, because the brain is very complicated. First of all, everything you know is remembered, but there is a way in which we distinguish between seeing somebody here now and the memory of having seen somebody else who is not here now, but whom you did see in the past, and you know perfectly well when you remember that other person's face, it's not an experience of the person being here. How is this? Because memory signals have a different cue attached to them than present time signals. They come on a different kind of vibration. Sometimes, however, the wiring gets mixed up and present experiences come to us with a memory cue attached to them. And then we have what is called a déjà vu experience. We are quite sure we've experienced this thing before. But the problem is that we don't see, don't ordinarily recognize, is that although memory is a series of signals with a special kind of cue attached to them so that we don't confuse them with present experience, they are actually all part of the same thing as present experience. They are all part of this constantly flowing life process, and there is no separate witness standing aside from the process, watching it go by. You're all involved in it. Now, accepting that, you see, going with that, although at first it sounds like the knell of doom, is if you don't clutch it anymore. Splendid. That's why I said that death should be an occasion for a great celebration, that people should say happy death to you, and always surround death with joyous rites, because this is the opportunity for the greatest of all experiences, when you can finally let go because you know there's nothing else to do. There was a kamikaze pilot who escaped because his plane that he was flying at an American aircraft carrier went wrong, and he landed in the water instead of hitting the plane, so he survived. But he said afterwards that he had the most extraordinary state of exaltation. It wasn't a kind of patriotic ecstasy, but the very thought that in a moment he would cease to exist, that he would just be gone, for some mysterious reason that he couldn't understand, made him feel absolutely like a god. Well then, in Buddhist philosophy, this a sort of annihilation of oneself, this acceptance of change, is the doctrine of the world as the void. This doctrine did not emerge very clearly, very prominently in Buddhism until quite a while after Gautama the Buddha had lived. We begin to find this, though, becoming prominent about the year 100 BC, and by 200 AD it had reached its peak. And it was developed by the Mahayana Buddhists And it is the doctrine of a whole class of literature which goes by this complex name, Prajna Paramita. Now, Prajna means wisdom. Paramita, for crossing over, for going beyond. There is a small Prajna Paramita Sutra, a big Prajna Paramita Sutra, and then there's a little short summary of the whole thing called the Hridaya, or Heart Sutra. And that is recited by Buddhists all over Northern Asia, Tibet, China, and Japan. And it contains the saying, that which is void is precisely the world of form, that which is form is precisely the void. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form, so on. And it elaborates on this theme. It's very short, but it's always chanted at important Buddhist ceremonies. And so it is supposed by scholars of all kinds who have a missionary background that the Buddhists are nihilists, that they teach that the world is really nothing, there isn't anything, and that there seems to be something is purely an illusion. But of course this philosophy is much more subtle than that. The main person who was responsible for developing and maturing this philosophy was Nagarjuna, and he lived about 200 AD. One of the most astonishing minds that the human race has ever produced. And the name of Nagarjuna's school of thought is Madhyamika, which means really the doctrine of the middle way. But it's sometimes also called the doctrine of emptiness, or Shunyavada, from the basic word shunya, or sometimes shunya has ta added on the end, and that ta means ness, emptiness. Well then, emptiness means essentially transience. That's the first thing it means. Nothing to grasp, nothing permanent, nothing to hold on to. But it means this with special reference to ideas of reality, ideas of God, ideas of the self, the Brahman, anything you like. What it means is that reality escapes all concepts. If you say there is a God, that's a concept. If you say there is no God, that's a concept. And Nagarjuna is saying that always your concepts will prove to be attempts to catch water in a sieve, or wrap it up in a parcel. So he invented a method of teaching Buddhism which was an extension of the dialectic method that the Buddha himself first used, and this became the great way of studying, especially at the University of Nalanda, which has been re-established in modern times, but of course it was destroyed by the Muslims when they invaded India. The University of Nalanda, where the dialectic method of enlightenment was taught. The dialectic method is perfectly simple. It can be done with an individual student and a teacher, or with a group of students and a teacher. And you would be amazed how effective it is when it involves precious little more than discussion. Some of you no doubt have attended tea groups, blab labs, in which people are there and they don't know quite why they're there, and there's some sort of a so-called resource person to disturb them. And after a while they get the most incredible emotions, and somebody tries to dominate the discussion of the group, say, and then the group kind of goes into the question of why he's trying to dominate it, and so on and so forth. Well, these were the original blablabs. And they have been repeated in modern times with the most startling effects. That is to say, the teacher gradually elicits from his participant students what are their basic premises of life. What is your metaphysic? In the sense, I'm not using metaphysic in a kind of a spiritual sense, but what are your basic assumptions? What real ideas do you operate on as to what is right and what is wrong, what is the good life and what is not? What arguments are you going to argue strongest? Where do you take your stand? The teacher soon finds this out for each individual concerned, and then he demolishes it. He absolutely takes away that person's compass. And so they start getting very frightened and say to the teacher, oh, all right, I see now, of course I can't depend on this, but what should I depend on? And unfortunately, the teacher doesn't offer any alternative suggestions, but simply goes on to examine the question, why do you think you have to have something to depend on? Now, this is kept up over quite a period, and the only thing that keeps the students from going insane is the presence of a teacher who seems to be perfectly happy, but is not proposing any ideas. He's only demolishing them. So we get finally, not quite finally, to the void, the shunya. And what then? When you get to the void, there is an enormous and unbelievable sense of relief. That's nirvana. Phew, as I gave a proper English translation of nirvana. Great. So they are liberated, and yet they can't quite say why or what it is that they found out. So they call it the void. But Nagarjuna went on to say, you mustn't cling to the void. You have to void the void. And so the void of non-void is the great state, as it were, of Nagarjuna's Buddhism. But you must remember that all that has been voided, all that has been denied, are those concepts in which one has hitherto attempted to pin down what is real. In Zen Buddhist texts they say, you cannot nail a peg into the sky. And so, to be a man of the sky, a man of the void, is also called a man not depending on anything. And when you're not hung on anything, you are the only thing that isn't hung on anything, which is the universe. Which doesn't hang, you see. Where would it hang? It has no place to fall on, even though it may be dropping. There will never be the crash of it landing on concrete floor somewhere. But the reason for that is that it won't crash below because it doesn't hang above. And so there is a poem in Chinese which speaks of such a person as having above not a tile to cover the head, below not an inch of ground on which to stand. And you see, this which to people like us who are accustomed to rich imageries of the divine the loving Father in heaven who has laid down the eternal laws. O Word of God incarnate, O wisdom from above, O truth unchanged, unchanging, O light of life and love, the wisdom which from the hallowed page, a lantern for our footsteps, shines out from age to age. See, so that's very nice. We feel we know where we are, and that it's all been written down, and that in heaven the Lord God is resplendent with glory, with all the colors of the rainbow, with all the saints and angels around and everything like that. So we feel that it's positive, that we've got a real rip-roaring gutsy religion full of color and so on. But it doesn't work that way. The more clear your image of God, the less powerful it is, because you're clinging to it. The more it's an idol. But voiding it completely isn't going to turn it into what you think of as void. What would you think of as void? Being lost in a fog, so that it's white all around and you can't see in any direction. Being in the darkness, or the color of your head as perceived by your eyes. That's probably the best illustration that we would think of as the void. Because it isn't black and it isn't white, it isn't anything. But that's still not the void. Take the lesson from the head. How does your head look to your eyes? Well, I tell you, it looks like what you see out in front of you, because all that you see out in front of you is how you feel inside your head. So it's the same with this. And so, for this reason, the great sixth patriarch, Huineng in China, said that it was a great mistake for those who were practicing Buddhist meditation to try to make their minds empty. And a lot of people tried to do that. They sat down and tried to have no thoughts whatever in their minds. And not only no thoughts, but no sense experiences. So they'd close their eyes, they'd plug up their ears, and generally go in for sensory deprivation. Well, sensory deprivation, if you know how to handle it, can be quite interesting. It'll have the same sort of results as taking LSD or something like that. And there are special labs made nowadays where you can be sensorily deprived to an amazing degree. But if you're a sort of a good yogi, this doesn't bother you at all. It'll send some people crazy. But if you dig this world, you can have a marvelous time in a sensory deprivation scene. Also, especially if they get you into a condition of weightlessness. Skin divers going down below a certain number of feet, I don't know exactly how far it is, but get a sense of weightlessness. And at the same time, this deprives them of every sense of responsibility. They become alarmingly happy. And they have been known to simply take off their masks and offer them to a fish. And of course they then drown. So if you skin dive and you have to keep your eye on the time. You have to have a water watch or a friend who's got a string attached to you if you go down that far, and at a certain specific time you know you have got to get back. However happy you feel, and however much inclined to say, survival, what the hell's the point of that? And this is happening to the men who go out into space. They will increasingly find that they have to have automatic controls to bring them back. Quite aside that they can't change in any way from the spaceship. Now, isn't that interesting? Can you become weightless here? I said a little while ago that the person who really accepts transience begins to feel weightless. When Suzuki was asked, what is it like to have experienced Satori, enlightenment, he said, it's just like ordinary everyday experience, but about 2 inches off the ground. Zhuangzi, the Taoist, said, it is easy enough to stand still. The difficulty is to walk without touching the ground. And why do you feel so heavy? It isn't just a matter of gravitation and weight. It is that you feel that you are carrying your body around. So there is a koan in Zen Buddhism. Who is it that carries this corpse around? And so when you feel it, common speech expresses this all the time. Life is a drag. I feel I'm just dragging myself around. My body is a burden to me. To whom? To whom? That's the question. You see? And when there is nobody left for whom the body can be a burden, the body isn't a burden. But so long as you fight it, it is. So then, when there is nobody left to resist the thing that we call change, which is simply another word for life, and when we dispel the illusion that we think our thoughts, instead of being just a stream of thoughts, and that we feel our feelings instead of being just feelings, it's like saying, to feel the feelings is a redundant expression. It's like saying, actually, I hear sounds, for there are no sounds which are not heard. Hearing is sound. Seeing is sight. You don't see sights. Sightseeing is a ridiculous word. You could just say either sighting or seeing, one or the other, but sightseeing is nonsense. So we keep doubling our words, and this doubling is comparable to oscillation in an electrical system where there's too much feedback, where you remember in the old-fashioned telephone, where the receiver was separate from the mouthpiece, the transmitter. If you wanted to annoy someone who was abusing you on the telephone, you could make them listen to themselves by putting the receiver to the mouthpiece. But it actually didn't have that effect. It set up oscillation. It started to howl. It could be very, very hard on the ears. The same way, if you turn a television camera at the monitor, that is to say, the television set in the studio, the whole thing will start to jiggle. The visual picture will be of oscillation, like that. And the same thing happens here. When you get to think that you think your thoughts, the you standing aside the thoughts has the same sort of consequence as seeing double. And then you think, can I observe the thinker thinking the thoughts? Or, I am worried, and I ought not to worry, but because I can't stop worrying, I'm worried because I worry. And you see where that could lead to. It leads to exactly the same situation that happens in the telephone, and that is what we call anxiety, trembling. But this discipline that we're talking about of Nagarjunas abolishes anxiety, because you discover that no amount of anxiety makes any difference to anything that's going to happen. In other words, from the first standpoint, the worst is going to happen. You're all going to die. And don't just put it off in the back of your mind and say, I'll consider that later. It's the most important thing to consider now, because it enables you. It is the mercy of nature, because it's going to enable you to let go and not defend yourself all the time, waste all energies in self-defense. So this, you will find that when Buddhists use the word mind, they've several words for mind, but I'm not going into the technicality at the moment. They mean space. See, space is your mind. It's very difficult for us to see that because we think we're in space and look out at it. There are various kinds of space. There's visual space, distance. There is audible space, silence. There is temporal space, as we say, between times. There is musical space, so-called distance between intervals, or the intervals between tones, rather. It's quite a different kind of space than temporal or visual space. There's tangible space. But all these spaces, you see, are the mind. They are the dimensions of consciousness. And so, this great space, which every one of us apprehends from a slightly different point of view, in which the universe moves, this is the mind. So it's represented by a mirror, because although the mirror has no color, it is for that reason able to receive all the different colors. Meister Eckhart said, in order to see color, my eye has to be free from color. So in the same way, in order not only to see, but also to hear, to think, to feel, you have to have an empty head. And the reason why you are not aware of your brain cells, unless you're only aware of your brain cells if you get a tumor or something in the brain, when it gets sick. But in the ordinary way, you're totally unconscious of your brain cells. They're void. And for that reason, you see everything else. So that's the central principle of the Mahayana. And it works in such a way, you see, that it releases people from the notion that Buddhism is clinging to the void. This was very important when Buddhism went into China. The Chinese really dug this, because Chinese are a very practical people. And when they found these Hindu Buddhist monks trying to empty their minds and to sit perfectly still and not to engage in any family activities, they were celibates. Chinese thought they were crazy. Why do that? And so the Chinese reformed Buddhism, and they allowed Buddhist priests to marry. And in fact, what they especially enjoyed was a sutra that came from India, in which a layman was a wealthy merchant called Vimalakirti, out-argued all the other disciples of Buddha. And of course, you know, if in these are these dialectic arguments that are very, very intense things. If you win the argument, everybody else has to be your disciple. So Vimalakirti, the layman, won the debate, even with Manjusri, who is the bodhisattva of supreme wisdom. They all had to see a contest to define the void, and all of them gave their definitions. Finally, Manjusri gave his. And Vimalakirti was asked then for his definition, and he said nothing. And so he won the whole argument. Thunderous silence. Change, and everything is changed, nothing can be held on to. To the degree that you go with a stream, you see, you are still. You're flowing with it. But to the degree you resist the stream, then you notice that the current is rushing past you and fighting with you. So swim with it. Go with it. And you're there. You're at rest. And this is, of course, particularly true when it comes to those moments when life really seems to be going to take us away. And the stream of change is going to swallow us completely. The moment of death. And we think, oh, this is it. This is the end. And so at death we withdraw. Say, no, not that. Not yet, please. But actually, the whole problem is that there really is no other problem for human beings than to go over that waterfall when it comes, just as you go over any other waterfall, just as you go on from day to day, just as you go to sleep at night. Be absolutely willing to die. Now, I'm not preaching. I'm not saying you ought to be willing to die and that you should muscle up your courage and somehow put on a good front when the terrible thing comes. That's not the idea at all. The point is that you can only die well if you understand this system of waves. If you understand that your disappearance as the form in which you think you are you, your disappearance as this particular organism, is simply seasonal, that you are just as much the dark space beyond death as you are the light interval called life. These are just two sides of you, because you is the total wave. See, you can't have half a wave. Nobody ever saw waves which just had crests and no troughs. So you can't have half a human being who is born but doesn't die. Half a thing. That would be only half a thing. But the propagation of vibrations, and life is vibration, it simply goes on and on, but its cycles are long cycles and short cycles. Space, you see, is not just nothing. If I could magnify my hand to an enormous degree so that you could see all the molecules in it, I don't know how far apart they would be, but it seems to me they would be something like tennis balls in a very, very large space. And you'd look, when I move my hand like this, and say, for God's sake, look at all those tennis balls. They're all going together. Crazy. And there are no strings tying them together. Isn't that queer? No, but there's space going with them. And space is a function of, or it's an inseparable aspect of, whatever solids are in the space. that is the clue, probably, to what we mean by gravity. We don't know yet. So in the same way, when those marvelous sandpipers come around here, the little ones, while they're in the air flying, they have one mind. They move all together. When they alight on the mud, they become individuals and they go picking around for worms or something. But one click of the fingers and all those things are going zipped into the air. They don't seem to have a leader because they don't follow when they turn. They all turn together and go off in another direction. Amazing. But they're like the molecules in my hand. So then you see, here's the principle. When you don't resist change, I mean over-resist. I don't mean being flabby. When you don't resist change, you see that the changing world, which disappears like smoke, is no different from the nirvana world. Nirvana, as I said, means breathe out. Let go of the breath. So in the same way, don't resist change. It's all the same principle. So the Bodhisattva saves all beings, not by preaching sermons to them, but by showing them that they are delivered, they are liberated by the very fact of not being able to stop changing. You can't hang on to yourself. You resisting death. I love the story of a conversation at an English country house at a dinner party, where the hostess started up the question of Church of England. He was the church warden, chief of the vestry in the local country parish. And the lady said, "Sir Roderick, you haven't said a word. What do you think is going to happen to you when you..." And they make death just awful by pretending it doesn't happen. See what happens. You go to a hospital and you're at the end. You've got terminal cancer. And all your friends come around and they wear false smiles and they say, "Cheer up, you'll be all right. In a few days from now you'll be back home and we'll go out for a picnic again." The doctors have their bedside man. You see, a doctor is absolutely helpless with a terminal case because a doctor's by social definition a healer, and he's not allowed to help you die. He's out of role, even though, I mean, he may sneak behind the rules and do it, but he's definitely, he's got to heal you. So he's going to keep you indefinitely on the end of tubes and all kinds of things, while there's a certain grave demeanor to all this, and all the nurses are so pleasant and so totally distant because they know this is death. And they mayn't be frank with you. That's why they feel distant. It's not that they're not concerned. It's not that they're heartless people. But that they just don't know how to be frank, like lots of people when they meet a drunk. They don't know what to do with a drunk. Because he's not behaving right. So when you're dying, you're not behaving right. You're supposed to live. See, so we don't know what to do with a dying person. We don't get around that person and say, listen, man, listen, I've got the news for you. You're going to die. And this is going to be great. Look, no more responsibilities. Don't have to pay those bills anymore. Don't have to worry about anything. You're going to just die. And let's go out with a bang. Let's have a party, see? We'll put some of that morphine in you so that you won't hurt too much. But we're going to prop you up in bed and we're going to bring all our friends around and we're going to have champagne and you're going to die at the end of it, see? And it's going to be just marvelous. It's like being born, see? When we had birth problems, see, all women used to think that birth had to be painful. It was good for them. It was one of the things you had to suffer because you'd been screwing around with people, and therefore you had to have a child, and it's got to hurt. And then the doctors got together and they scratched their heads, and the man called Grantley Dick Reed said, "No, birth doesn't hurt, it's natural." All we've got to do is to talk these women into the idea that it doesn't hurt, that all these so-called pains are just tensions, and that birth is great. It's not a disease. It's not really something you ought to go to hospital for, because you associate hospitals with diseases and sickness. Birth isn't sickness. All right, now let's do some new thinking. What about death? Is death sickness? Or is it a healthy, natural event like being born? Of course it is. So, I mean, a little change in social attitude about this will fortify everybody else. I mean, if I'm alone and all my relatives are going, kind of pretending to me, it's going to be hard for me. I've got to challenge the whole bunch of them and get my dander up and say, listen, damn you, I don't want all this thing around here. You've got to take a different attitude about my death. Well, that's hard. But if everybody helps me, and we do, we're all one body, if they all come around and say, congratulations, you're going to die. Liberation now, you see, because just before you die, I mean, look, I know very well a skillful priest handling a person dying can do this for them. But he has to talk very, very, very straight. And he has to say, listen, these doctors, don't you pay any attention to them. They're trying to amuse you and deceive you. You're going to die. This isn't terrible. But it's just going to be the end of you as a system of memories. And so you've got a great chance right now, before it happens, to let go of everything. Because you know it's going to go, and it's going to help you. It's going to help you let go of everything. So if you have any possessions left, give them away. Give everything away. And if you have anything to say that is you felt that you ought to say before you die, and that you're kind of hanging on to and it's bothering you, say it. I mean, I don't mean necessarily a last confession, but say it said that Adlai Stevenson, shortly before he died, said that he had been making a monkey of himself because he didn't agree with the government's policy about something or other. You know, he had to get that off his chest because he had a little thought in the back of his mind that things were catching up with him. You see? So the moment comes when this thing called death has to be taken completely, not as some ghastly accident, something that all your friends are going to stay away because you're awful. I mean, sometimes people, when they die, are in a very unpleasant physical condition. They don't smell good, they don't look good, and so on. But an enormous amount can be done with scientific methods to make things reasonably tidy from a purely sensory point of view. But the main thing is the attitude, that death is as positive as birth and should be a matter for rejoicing, because death is the symbol of the liberation. There is a wonderful saying that Ananda Kumaraswamy used to quote, I pray that death will not come and find me still unannihilate. In other words, that man dies happy if there is no one to die. In other words, if the ego has disappeared before death caught up with it. But you see, the knowledge of death helps the ego to disappear, because it tells you you can't hang on. So what we need, if we're going to have a good religion around, that's one of the places where it can start. I was talking a great deal yesterday afternoon about the Buddhist attitude to change, to death, to the transience of the world, and we're showing that preachers of all kinds stir people up in the beginning by alarming them about change. That's like somebody, actually raising an alarm, just in the same way as if I want to pay you a visit, I ring the doorbell. And then we can come in and I don't need to raise an alarm anymore. So in the same way, it sounds terrible, you see, that everything is going to die and pass away, and here you are, thinking that happiness, sanity, and security consist in clinging on to things which can't be clung to, and in any case there isn't anybody to cling to them. And the whole thing is the weaving of smoke. So that's the initial standpoint. But as soon as you really discover this and you stop clinging to change, then everything is quite different. It becomes amazing. And not only do all your senses become more wide awake, not only do you feel almost that you're walking on air, but you see finally that there is no duality, no difference between the ordinary world and the nirvana world. They're the same world, but what makes the difference is the point of view. And of course, if you keep identifying yourself with some sort of stable entity that sits and watches the world go by, you don't acknowledge your union, your inseparability from everything else that there is. You go by with all the rest of the things, but if you insist on trying to take a permanent stand, on trying to be a permanent witness of the flux, then it grates against you and you feel very uncomfortable. But it is a fundamental feeling in most of us that we are such witnesses. We feel that behind the stream of our thoughts, of our feelings and our experiences, there is something which is the thinker, the feeler, and the experiencer. Not recognizing that that is itself a thought, feeling, or experience, and it belongs within and not outside the changing panorama of experience. It's what you call a cue signal. In other words, when you telephone and your telephone conversation is being tape recorded, it's the law that there shall be a beep every so many seconds. And that beep cues you in to the fact that this conversation is recorded. So in a very similar way, in our everyday experience, there's a beep which tells us this is a continuous experience which is mine. Beep. In the same way, for example, it is a cue signal when a composer arranges some music and he keeps in it a recurrent theme.